All right. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this installment of the Climate and webinar series. I'm Aaron Wilson. I'm Assistant Professor and OSU Extension Ag Weather and Climate Field Specialist. Assisting me today with the webinar is Assistant Professor, co-lead of the Ag Crops team in Madison County A&R Extension Educator Amanda Doritas. Before we get started, just a reminder, feel free to use the Q&A box at the bottom for all your questions. We will be monitoring the questions today and jumping in time to time as needed. So feel free to put those questions as you think of those. There will be plenty of time for questions as we move along in between really the two sessions here between our guest speaker and then a little bit more of the climate tools at the end. Toward the end of today's program, we will also provide a Qualtrics survey link just to get some feedback on today's programming and how we can improve future installments of this climate and webinar series. So today we are discussing climate and farm management, and I'm really pleased to welcome former longtime Defiance County A&R educator and now farm management field specialist with OSU Extension in A&R and associate professor Bruce Clevenger. So welcome, Bruce, and the stage is yours.
Hey, well, thanks, Aaron. I appreciate that. I'll also add that I am one of three field specialists for farm management. We're very proud at Ohio State that we have built our capacity, a larger capacity now to deploy farm management resources across Ohio. We're here to support our county educators and also deliver programs in that mechanism across Ohio, as well as do other programs for industry and folks that are looking for farm management information. And so I'm really pleased to work within this content area. And I think it's appropriate too, of course, that farm management is part of the climate discussion. And so as I think of farm management, one of the longtime phrases that I've heard about farm management, it kind of goes like this: 80% of the profit or losses that farms experience come from the time we spend, about 20% of our time that we spend making those decisions. And that's on average. So think of our week, think of our day. How much time do we focus in on decision making? Is that 20% of the day? Is that 20% of the week? Or is it less? So if 20% is the average, there's going to be some effective managers that spend more than 20% of their time doing the pros and cons. And then there's going to be some managers that maybe are effective and they spend less than 20% of their time making decisions. But those decisions impact a farm's ability to have profit and loss. And so that's part of today's discussion about climate and how to navigate this realm that we're in when it comes to climate. So when I think of farm management, what do I think it is? Well, I think it is that decision-making process. And for me, as I've talked about farm management over the years, I've thought about farm management in three pillars of which I think an effective farm manager can make decisions on: production, profitability, and responsibility. And so on the production side, in the case of often commodity producers like your corn, soybean, and wheat, beef, hogs, poultry, the economic forces of being just a commodity producer is often the lowest cost producer wins. And that often drives farms to be of certain size, take advantage of economies of scale. And that's important for that commodity farmer. So non-commodity producers based farms, these are specialties or niche farms or direct marketing, they still need to have that production side, but they too, both these managers, commodity and non-commodity producers, need to be focused in on profitability and what can reduce costs, but at the same time, what are opportunities to seek out revenue for that farm business. And maybe on the non-commodity farm industry, we're looking at taking advantage of realizing more of the higher percentage of the consumer retail dollar of our finished ag product. And so direct marketing is an important part of that. So both managers must focus on profit, both managers must focus on production, but we can't ignore, in my opinion, a third pillar, and that brings risk and opportunities. And I think it is in the realm of responsibility. What I mean by responsibility, it could be environmental responsibility, customer responsibility, community, or even industry responsibility. All of those responsibilities are part of that trifecta of those three pillars that I think are important for farm managers to consider. And it doesn't mean that we have to do one without the other. So we don't have to substitute one. All responsibilities have costs and values. And so in this webinar today, we're talking about this climate and we're talking about farm management. So again, I believe that all three of these pillars are related, and we don't have to give up one just to secure the other two within our farm business. And so I believe too that farm managers is the human capital. The people in the farm business are very powerful. Being open-minded and evaluating pros and cons is an important part of what a farm manager needs to do, whether again it's about production, profits, and or responsibilities. I think that's an important part of that. So I guess the discussion area today that I want us to consider is climate a risk or an opportunity? Climate trends, climate changes that we've seen and documented. So I'm going to take it on that two-prong approach. This first slide, as you see, is underlying risk. We're going to talk about the risk side first, and then we'll come back to the opportunity. So the framework that I'd like you to think about on the risk side are two kind of buckets of risk. One is the transition risk, and the other one is physical risk. Let me kind of define those as you see here. Transition risk for a farm manager would be forces that happen because we're in a transition to a low carbon economy. And I think we would agree that what we hear and see and read and purchase and sell, there's a transition that we see here in the United States and around the world to a lower carbon economy. And that's going to have some risks in some areas of policy and legal, technology, market, and reputation. But what that means is a low carbon economy or a decarbonized economy is an economy based on energies that are sourced from low greenhouse gas emissions. That makes sense. The low carbon economy is in some realms considered a precursor to what is a zero carbon economy, much more advanced, and certainly I don't know that we're all quite there yet. But another term you might hear is a carbon footprint. And a carbon footprint, of course, is the greenhouse gas estimate or use of an individual, let's say the things that I do, or the footprint of an event, maybe the state fair or you name it. The footprint of an organization or a service that we might purchase or be a part of, a carbon footprint of a place or a product. And these are all expressed in carbon dioxide equivalents. And so, again, just to give you that framework of one of the risks that we're going to talk about is evaluating the pros and cons of that transitional risk as a farm business. As we transition into a low carbon economy, how might be there some policy changes and legal technology markets and the reputation of the ag industry in that realm. A little bit closer to home, maybe. Think of the next risk as that physical risk. These are the physical impacts of that climate changing. Acute would be this very event-driven, and this is where we have observed or would expect those higher intensity events of extreme heat, rain, drought, those kind of issues that are event-driven. Another one would be chronic, and these would be the patterns that occur over time, and that would be another physical risk that as producers, we are going to end up making decisions about our production, our profitability, and our responsibility to those. So those are a couple of the risk areas that I think are important to keep in mind. Let's take a look at the opportunities. So as underlined above, is climate a risk or now? Let's talk about a few of those opportunities. So do you have that? Is there that golden egg out there that's available for an opportunity within this realm of climate? So there's a growing evidence of examples where industries are becoming very successful in reducing their operating costs and improving their efficiencies because of the ask or the trends to be maybe more soil conscious, soil resilient, and there's some potential there for resource efficiencies. Energy sources. Do we in agriculture, of course, have the opportunity to contribute to wind and solar and biofuels and carbon capture and those kind of factors? How do our products create opportunities in the marketplaces and the services that agriculture can provide for maybe other industries to accomplish maybe their climate objectives in their business? And of course, I think you tie a lot of those together, and we might rename it resilience. How are the things that we do to address climate trends and changes, whether that's, again, acute or chronic, either event-driven or the long-term trends? How are the things that we are doing now improving our resilience to those shocks, those events that shock our production systems, whether that's stress on our livestock, whether that's stress in our fruit and vegetable production, grain production, anything that we have in agriculture? I think that we need to take a look at some of those opportunities. So what might that look like for a farm manager? What are they going to see? Are they going to see snow in the rain gauge? Well, they might. I try to put my rain gauge out after the last chance of snow, but no, there it is. Snow in the rain gauge. It's not uncommon, some would say. So as we take a look at this, what might be some examples of what that would look like? So consider these climate risks again, and maybe more specifically, some examples of how this would be. So strategic thinking and planning in and of itself has costs to organization. It's going to have some costs to a farm manager, meaning how do we evaluate risks that present themselves? And that cost might be, I need to go to some conferences and engage in professional development. I need to be engaged in what's the next program opportunities that are there. So thinking and strategic thinking and planning, there's going to be a cost associated with that. How does a farm move those human capital resources into engaging into that decision-making process? And so conferences and outreach programs and staying connected with what might be on the first here, consumer behaviors. And so consumers can shift their preferences pretty fast, sometimes overnight, seemingly. And it's difficult sometimes for an industry to invest into those assets and the supply chain. So consumers can shift a lot faster than the industry can reinvest or retool into our production systems. And so we are in agriculture a very heavily capitalized and invested industry. And so it takes a little time for us to shift to changing consumer behaviors. But I think that that's a potential cost if we don't recognize what those consumers are needing, asking for, demanding at times, whether through policy or how they spend their dollars, is going to be important. Another risk would be increased operating costs. There may be some compliance costs that are going to be bound to be a risk for us in agriculture to comply. So some other more day-to-day on the physical risk, the acute, the event-driven type of risks. What about insurances? And so there was a study recently done by Stanford University that found that long-term warming contributed in the period of 1991 to 2017, just for that period of time, long-term warming in that period contributed $27 billion of losses to U.S. crop insurance programs. And so those are extra dollars associated just with those extreme events. And really, half of that $27 billion was associated with the 2012 record smashing single costliest year for crop insurance in that period. Of the $27 billion, almost $19 billion of extra crop insurance costs was associated with that particular drought event that it really engulfed much of the Midwest. So in the short term, as we now are thinking about Farm Bill and public policy and perceptions, one could argue that the pros and cons of subsidized crop insurance premiums at this point could have some tugs and some pushes by the public and congressional members in future Farm Bill discussions. Keep in mind that the annual government investment into subsidized crop insurance premiums is $9 billion per year. So keep that in mind as we think about that as a risk management tool, but there's a cost associated with that. Of course, then equipment sizes, as producers make choices about different equipment, whether that's sizing of equipment or the function of that piece of equipment. Maybe it's a different conservation practice that equipment now can do for us, but it's going to have a cost associated with it. Maybe it's robot strawberry harvesting, and maybe that strawberry robot harvester is going to be operating at night, but that's going to have a cost at night because maybe that's when it's going to function most efficiently because of the lighting feature of that robot versus daylight to distinguish between ripe strawberries and maybe green yet strawberries. So these functions and purposes of the equipment investments are going to have a cost as we manage different opportunities in equipment. Water management, both on the drainage side, but also the irrigation side, and then the responsibility of how that water is either recycled or returned to the nation's waters for that, and the costs associated with having access and using the energy to use that water. Another factor in the cost of climate risks would be private research and development investments, meaning think of seed corn today that we're going to be planting here in a month here across the Midwest or so. That's 2 years in the making. And so as what is going to be the strategic thinking and planning for companies to plan for that next seed technology necessary to merge and to work with climate trend changes and also the events that we see in climate agriculture. So let's go from risks to opportunities, because there's always two sides of that coin. And so as we look at the two sides of this coin, we're going to be looking at revenue opportunities for, again, transitioning to a low carbon economy. We've all heard, I think, about leasing farmland for energy development. I think that's weighing heavy on some communities as they decide how that would look and how individual landowners might make decisions within the realm of a community. Also, the developing and sometimes described the Wild West of carbon market payments and what those opportunities look like. Across the Midwest, here in Ohio, there's already been carbon market payments made to producers. So that is developing, and there's opportunity there to learn and to grow what that would look like. Also, with the rollout of climate smart agriculture, specifically climate smart commodities. This was a USDA investment just recently, November of 2022, I believe. $3 billion was invested and awarded to 141 projects across the Midwest. One example would be ADM and the partners of Climate Smart Solutions. So ADM, Archer Daniels Midland, they received $90 million to utilize incentive payments for thousands of producers across 15 states to adapt and implement climate smart agriculture practices like cover crops, reduced tillage, and nutrient management, but also to develop markets. ADM plans to transition climate smart products to be sold on a premium per bushel, allowing climate smart products to be funded with the supply chain. So taking advantage of the consumer appetite for those climate smart commodities and products that agriculture is producing. And if you think $3 billion sounds like a lot, don't forget that in the Inflation Reduction Act of 2022, there was $19 billion funded for farm conservation programs for practices to address climate change. So revenue and opportunities and support that's out there, the public good supporting what agriculture has an opportunity to engage in. Down below on the physical side, again, those acute or chronic event-driven or climate trends that we've seen, what are the opportunities there? Aaron and others have talked to the details of extended growing seasons, adding certain days to the time that we have in a growing season. But what does the middle of the growing season might look like and how that might look different in years to come? Potentially lowering operating costs. And one that I came across in this research was the potential for producers to take advantage of green financing, meaning could there be a lower cost interest to obtain capital and purchasing power by a farm that's engaged in low carbon economy practices, making them eligible for green financing so that they can operate in a more lower cost environment on the farm, reducing costs of dollars and investing, financing the farm operation. And then, of course, opportunities from the revenue of soil conservation, just the fact that saving the best topsoil that we have on our farms and utilizing it for the greatest production that we have, and soil conservation in a net gain of generating revenue for the farm. And lastly on this list is taking advantage of what we can use here in the United States is the U.S. interstate trade. Recent study done by the University of Illinois stated that the U.S. interstate trade is expected to help mitigate the economic impacts of climate change to about $14.5 billion in the next quarter century, meaning our ability to interstate trade of goods, products, and services within agricultural industry is going to be an opportunity for us to shift and move from places of the have-nots to from the haves to the have-nots efficiently with interstate trade is the outcome of that study. So a short list, but you might have come across other opportunities with the climate sector that we're in. So I guess my recommendation today as I wrap this up is to really keep an eye on the horizon, thinking of not just climate and the impact of that is always the risk side, but what are the opportunities that a farm manager, a farm management team, and your partners with a farm operation have in really truly evaluating what there are with investments back to the farm, support to do the things that are public goods, and keeping an eye on the horizon and make sure that we spend that time as a farm manager. Is it 20%? Is it 15%? Or are you spending enough time in the week to really self-study and look at these opportunities for the value that they can bring to the farm operation? With that, I'd be certainly glad to entertain any questions or comments that the group might have from this discussion so far today.
Bruce, thank you so much. Are there any questions out there? Go ahead and type your questions in. Feel free to kind of elaborate or think about your own experiences as well in your impacts. Bruce, I really appreciated how you framed this between the risks and opportunities, because I think that's really important. If you think about kind of the challenges out there, what would you say is kind of the number one challenge for small producers, large producers in terms of taking that first initial step?
I think for some it's going to be that how do I become productive, resilient, have production resilience on my farm? We know that at the farm gate we're seeing more of those events that impact from the climate trends, and we see that we may have more rain events greater than 2 inches. How am I going to be able to withstand that on my farm? And does that take an investment into the farm operation? Does that require financing or capital? There are several opportunities for support in financing of equipment, either operating and loans, operating and equipment purchase loans, and being strategic that maybe what is that next piece of equipment that's going to be with me for the long term, that's going to give me the greatest resilience on the farm from a production standpoint to withstand what may happen to me this production year, the following production year, and maybe within the next 5 to 7 years for that piece of equipment.
If I can pick your brain one more time, I was thinking about, when you mentioned this, US interstate trade, it's really interesting to think about this. Obviously, a lot of attention on the local impact, what's happening to the individual, the farm, but thinking about for the nation, for the, where we're producing our goods and some of those shifts and the risks and opportunities there as well. Can you speak to that a little bit in terms of from a national perspective?
I think a lot of there's a fair amount of infrastructure that's developed to export certainly our commodities. And so how do we get commodities to the river system and get them to our southern global markets? How do we get them out to the global trade? And we can't ignore the interstate infrastructure needs within agriculture. Is that the rail system? How efficient is our rail system to move east to west rather than north to south? How do we feed into those efficiently move resources or product into those drought-stricken areas of the Western Corn Belt when they have experienced months upon months of drought and impacting and affecting their basis and a lack of product there. And so I think that's part of the bigger picture when it comes to interstate travel, interstate logistics, is ensuring that we not only have a logistics systems for global markets, but think too of the bulk of our corn use in the United States is domestic use. 350 billion bushels of corn, a fairly small percentage of that is actually exported. Much of that is used within domestic uses of the United States. So making sure that we have an effective, for both all of our commodities, effective way to move those efficiently. And sometimes it's not just the commodities, it's also the finished product from one coast to another when we have the needs because of climate challenges in production.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm thinking about, from a risk perspective, it's not just singular. So it's not like a risk on just the crops, but when you think about the trade and you think about moving goods, the changes we're seeing in the, those chronic changes you talked about put more stress on infrastructure, on railway, on highway, on even, navigable waters in terms of getting goods in and out of the country or in and out of certain areas. And so you can see the complexity is pretty layered there. So really appreciate that. And I think it's good. I've on a time or two have been accused of being a little bit doom and gloom, obviously, when you think about from the long-term patterns, but I think it's really, there are things that we can do about it, certainly to adapt and also mitigate some of those chronic and even short-term things. And so looking at those opportunities, I think is really important. So I really appreciate the way you framed that today.
I think in the future, we're actually going to see packaging on products that are not only going to maybe report the calories or any other information about the product. There's going to be more information about whether we like it or not. There's going to be a carbon footprint kind of declaration. It's going to have a reputation to that business. It's going to have a reputation towards the industry and the producers that are contributing to that product. So alignment to that consumer demand, consumer behavior, right or wrong, I think it's something to pay attention to.
Yeah, good stuff. Thank you so much, Bruce. If some other questions come up over the second half of today's presentation, feel free to put those questions in the Q&A and we'll get to those. I'm going to obviously piggyback off of Bruce a little bit and kind of dig in a little bit on the adaptation side, and then end with an introduction to another tool at the Midwestern Regional Climate Center that some of you may be interested in. So a couple of tools today and just some more information thinking about adaptation and the like. So let's go ahead and transition here. Hopefully we're seeing, Amanda, if you can tell me if we're on the right screen.
Yes, looks good.
All right, awesome. Yeah, so, thinking a little bit more about this climate adaptation and resilience and, the risks and opportunities, how does one evaluate these things? And there are a number of us throughout the North Central region and other parts of the United States that are thinking about these from an extension point of view, and how do we provide tools that are available to help kind of evaluate or get started. I always like to show this here. I've had an opportunity over the last couple of years to work with the Northern Institute of Applied Climate Science, Patricia Leopold there. And they do a really nice job of thinking about adaptation and developing a forestry and a little bit of agriculture adaptation workbook. So some of this is borrowed from there. But I always think, obviously they're earlier when we're talking with Bruce, there's a local component, there's a national component, there's a global component. But adaptation, when it comes down to the individual landowner, every landowner is different. And so I think it's really good to start there to say, okay, my operation is not like my neighbor's operation or others. So we think about these potential impacts that are affecting both of us, or maybe not equally, but certainly, things like increased temperature, especially in winter, more rainfall, more off-season, winter, spring rainfall versus summer. Along with that come these acute events that Bruce talked about, more extreme heavy downpours, or the weeds, or all kinds of other stressors. We're similarly feeling those things. But the question that we start to ask then is, how sensitive is the operation? And so when we start to think about how we're evaluating our resilience to these conditions, really the sensitivity of our own operation really comes in play. And then that's where we really transition into how adaptive can we be, right? How well can this particular operation, your operation, cope with these potential impacts? How resilient is this operation? And a lot of you might be asking yourselves, I don't know, right? I don't know, where do I start? And that's the gap that we're trying to fill. And hopefully I'll provide some resources to that today. Again, each decision is unique, right? For each landowner. The land is different. Our values, culture, resources, location, where we are in life, our stages in life, our families, all these things, so many decisions that we have to make that, thinking about climate is just one more layer there to what we're doing. So there are, opportunities, there are resources out there to help us to get started about how to think about climate resilience on the farm. There was this great resource a few years ago put out by the Midwest Regional Climate Center. So this is a USDA climate hub. I'm sorry, the USDA Midwest Climate Hub, not the Climate Center, that's something different, but the Climate Hub, putting out the adaptation resources for agriculture across the Midwest and the Northeast. What's really nice about this is it's really organized around 8 different strategies that you'll notice are really representing win-win opportunities that help and are framed within that farm management kind of structure that help in a lot of areas, not just climate resilience, but improved profitability or efficiency on the farm, thinking about how we sustain these fundamental functions of soil and water. How do we reduce the stresses on crops and livestock, managing farms and fields as part of a larger landscape? These are ideas, these strategies that one can use to evaluate their resilience or their current state. And so there's a workbook that's also available with this that I think is really good. And then also there's a forestry adaptation resource as well. So you can see the link there to that publication. Really, when we think about the tree side of things, or agroforestry, and as a landowner, and if you've got a tract of land with trees, thinking about how to manage those in a resilient way. So kind of a companion to that is that tree atlas link that you see here. Trees are kind of the long term. We're planting them today. 30, 40 years from now, we might be harvesting them. And so thinking about that management, what trees might be more susceptible or less susceptible as we move into the future. So some of that physical risk that Bruce was talking about, and kind of grounding it there, thinking about what might thrive as our weather patterns and climate are changing. And then another resource here with that adaptation workbook that I mentioned. And this is really geared toward natural resources managers and also farmers that, sort of thinking about your land as, are there different areas that you might identify as a project, right? And maybe it's reverting some portion of your land back to a wetland, or, maybe you've got, you want to plant trees or some riparian area or something like this. This is a way to kind of assess that. And one of the critical things that from a climate resilience point of view that I really like to kind of hit home is on this local assessment. What are the impacts and vulnerabilities? How are things changing at your location? It's really personal, and I think getting as personal as possible helps you kind of identify those risks and opportunities at your particular location. There's no one size fits all from an assessment point of view, and there's no one size fits all from an impact point of view either. I think it's important to keep in mind, I think one of the things that as a climate scientist, we get kind of bogged down or others, ask us, it's like this idea of transformational change, of complete overhaul of a particular system. And we can think about those things. We can think about transportation or the economy or large sector ideas and some transformational change. Even like thinking about the transition toward low carbon economy, climate smart agriculture, can even, these can seem a bit daunting, right? As a personal landowner. And so I think it's good to remind us all that adaptation actions, many of those actions do not, there's kind of a typo here, but do not, they may not look different than what you're already doing. Right. There's this idea that, climate, obviously, these chronic changes have been happening over a long period of time. And a lot of farmers have been adapting. All of us have been adapting in some way to a more or lesser extent. And so thinking about, if you've got a piece of pie here, thinking about those actions, the actions that a lot of folks are already doing, really climate change just makes them that much more important. Nutrient efficiency, good, strong management of weeds and insects. These are things that just make that climate change just makes it more important that we're paying attention to these things. There's a smaller piece of the pie might be small tweaks that help improve effectiveness. Maybe I change my water management a little bit. Maybe I, make small tweaks to crop and growing season or the crop varieties or things like that. These are small tweaks. And then even a smaller piece of the pie might be those new and different actions that you consider. Maybe some folks even consider them wild and crazy. I know from a conservation standpoint, you'll hear, a lot of farmers, folks like Fred Yoder out in Plain City, what are you doing on a few acres to try something new? Just taking a few acres and trying some new management strategy that might help then build some resilience. And so it's good to remember a lot of the things that we're doing are already good actions for the changes that we're seeing in both acute and chronic weather pattern changes. But what, some of those smaller things that we can do to help, usher in kind of a new way of doing things. So this is one kind of framework that I like to refer to when we're thinking about, resilience. Resilience is sort of the middle way, the middle term in this what's called RRT framework between resistance, resilience, and transition, right? So you can think about a forest or you can think about your farmland from a resistance perspective. That's more on we want to reduce the impacts. We want to maintain current conditions kind of thinking that you see on that scale at the bottom, right? So it would be things like improving defenses of your ag fields to change and disturbance, right? You want to maintain relatively unchanged conditions. For some landowners, that might be possible. For others, it might be more of a challenge as the climate continues to change and we see the changes that are taking place. Frequent flood events over the same areas of your field, it might be hard to resist those changes. So another way is kind of that middle ground, thinking about resilience, right? We're going to accommodate some degree of change. I think farmers are good about this, that there's some degree of change about my field or my management structure. But ultimately, what I want to strive toward is to return to that prior reference condition after the disturbance. And there's some folks that say resilience means coming back to that prior reference period. Some say maybe bouncing a little bit forward, making those small tweaks again that might improve our overall resilience. So I think that that's kind of that middle way. And then there's kind of another way in this RRT framework is that it's about embracing potential transition. It's about intentionally facilitating change. What I think is good about this, kind of this option is, I think it speaks to what Bruce was talking about. When you identify those opportunities, maybe if you're intentionally facilitating a change toward a more lower carbon or more energy efficient method, then you're sort of accepting or embracing the changes that are taking place, understanding that it is going to cause some changes in how we manage our farms. But this could then also enable that farm within the larger ecosystem to respond to these new conditions. If you've seen some talks in the past, when I show a figure that, Ohio's climate is on the move toward a mid-Atlantic winter-like conditions and an Arkansas-like summer. So if you think from this resistance standpoint, from a climate perspective, we're not likely to return to that prior condition in the long term. We're not likely to be able to withstand those changes because agriculture doesn't look the same in Arkansas that it does in Ohio. So there are opportunities to transition. And of course, technology, genetics, hybrids, all these things come into play. I heard Scott Irwin, economist, last fall talking about, 55 bushel soybeans in Mississippi, right? So thinking about how 55, 60 bushels of soybeans, in a different climate, right? And as we trend toward that southern climate, what are the opportunities that we can do to transition to something new? We see this in nurseries, sort of tapping into more southern nurseries and cultivars and introducing those and experimenting, on a limited basis. This is just one way we can identify those different tactics to use. There are other resources that are available. I'm part of what's called the North Central Climate Collaborative for the Extension North Central region. And we have bi-monthly webinars where we're bringing in natural resource and climate experts to talk about a wide variety of topics, from national climate assessment to drainage, to insects, to pests, to farm management, different techniques. So all of those webinars are archived. And so if you're interested in seeing some more of that as well, the soil health nexus, again, we're all soil health conscious, water health conscious. And there are a lot of techniques and tools that are available there with the soil health nexus to help us think about some of these strategies, some of those strategies on the physical risk sides of things. And I really liked, again, Bruce, I was just over the moon really with the way that you frame this and thinking about transition and physical, this climate ready MSU, so this climate ready farm assessment. And hopefully you're going to be hearing a lot more about that. We are in a project now called Climate Ready Midwest. And so basically this is a multi-state extension climate hub, the Midwest Climate Hub Partnership. And basically what we want to do is increase the adoption of these regionally scalable climate smart agriculture techniques. Now, there's a lot of jargon there, right? And I would argue that, as Bruce mentioned, a lot of money coming out for climate smart agriculture and commodities, and I think there's a lot more in the pipeline. I think there's a bit of, what does climate smart agriculture mean? What does it mean to a single person? What does it mean to a state, to a region? And so we want to try to amplify and help define what that means a little bit, and then empower some of the education that's taking place. When we think about climate smart agriculture, one way to think about it is the implementation of farm management practices, right, that are climate informed. So they're informed by those local changes in our climate. They help build farm resiliency in light of those acute and chronic changes that Bruce talked about as we move toward net zero carbon emissions. So if you think about examples, right, again, those things that a lot of us are doing that just climate makes that much more important: managing water supplies, weed and nutrient management, soil health practices, diversifying our crops, adjusting our times of planting, and better carbon management. these are activities largely that a lot of folks are doing, whether they kind of realize it or not. They are climate resilient techniques. And so we want to raise that awareness of those techniques and how they fit into the larger picture. So part of that is Michigan State has been working on the last several years, and now as part of this new grant, to really enhance some of the tools that are available as a landowner to say, well, how resilient am I? Right? To ask that important question of what is my starting benchmark? How can I evaluate where I am currently to the changes that we're already seeing? And so Michigan State initially developed a field crop version. They now have, as part of our project, also a fruit farm version. We will also have some integrated livestock. We'll also be addressing some Black farming and indigenous farming communities as well, and how to envelop some of those techniques. Basically, it's an assessment. You can fill out an assessment for your farm. That's the link that you see there is climateready.msu.edu. And basically, it's just a questionnaire, a pretty quick questionnaire that will be submitted to the team. They'll evaluate through different weighted questions about resiliency and preparedness, and then just offer a score. And again, it's meant as a benchmark of, how climate aware, how aware are we to the local changes and some of the opportunities for adaptation out there. So these are the sections that are part of the current MSU assessment here. Again, how aware are we about tracking weather? I think most farmers are really good about that in the short term, those acute short-term events. More from the chronic point of view is that section 2, tracking weather. So some questions related to how are we tracking weather trends over longer periods of time? Getting into questions about soil type. Do you know your soil type, and moisture and management questions? Getting into section 4 with nutrients, pest pressure, 6 being that financial risk, and then 7, farm safety and stress. We know that, these combination of the chronic and acute changes are elevating stress, right? And the perception of stress, right? Some of the things that, as my grandma used to say, don't borrow worry. We're bad about that, right? We borrow worry. And I'm in a, as a climate scientist, obviously, I show some worrying things that kind of help us borrow worry. But just thinking about, how all these things fit together, you can see all of these are farm management questions, and these are farm management techniques. And I think as we improve our management of these things, we become more climate resilient. So I want to really encourage everyone to take a look at the Climate Ready Farm assessments there at climateready.msu.edu, and be on the lookout for some more information coming out about that as well. So kind of finally, what I want to do is just spend a minute or two here, and then we'll have plenty of time for questions today. But as part of this series is offering, tools. So like the MSU Ready, Climate Ready Assessment is one tool. We want to revisit the Midwestern Regional Climate Center today as well. So the MRCC Purdue.edu here to get you to the Midwestern Regional Climate Center. So I'm going to stop sharing my slide deck, and I'm actually going to now share the website. So if you go to the website for MRCC, again, as a reminder, and we'll throw a link to last month's webinar with Pierce Paul on climate and disease management. I sort of introduced you to the Midwestern Regional Climate Center and some of the products there. I want to introduce a new product here today called the Climate. This is the application tools environment. It's got a little bit of a learning curve to it, but I think there are a lot of data savvy or data interested farmers and farm managers out there. And I think it could offer really, it's a great dashboard for getting into some of the local conditions that you might have at your particular location. So again, if you're back on the main site here, if you click on, thanks Bruce for putting that in the chat. If you click on Climate Online Data Portal, now you're going to have to set up a quick registration, right? So it's free to access once you register. And so you might not be able to do that. You can certainly read the product guide today. You will be able to do that, just maybe not on the fly as I'm doing it as right now. But once you get registered, you can go ahead and log in. And like I said, there's a little bit of a learning curve here, but if it's the rain's moving in today, we can't get out and do much. Maybe it's a good afternoon to drink some more coffee and kind of evaluate your local conditions here. So there's a dashboard here on the left-hand side, a menu with a lot of different things that you can do. You can look at statewide data. You can look at individual station data. And so what I've got is if you go to select daily station, you can just use the map selector here on the right, and it'll pull up a map. MRCC has moved recently to Purdue. So I'm not sure what the default page will open up to. Maybe it's Illinois where it was before, or Lafayette, not West Lafayette, not really sure. But if you zoom into Ohio, you'll see a lot of dots, and these dots are different stations, data stations. The blue dots are the ones that are active currently. So if you just want the active stations from a National Weather Service or NOAA perspective, these are the stations that are active, official records here. And there are certainly some holes here in Ohio as part of the State Climate Office that we're trying to fill in. But I'm going to pick a location today. I don't know. Let's see. Let's go into Lima. We can zoom in here and we can see we've got a couple of Lima stations. The water treatment facilities usually have long-term weather stations. Also, the county airports are another good location. If we click on the Lima Allen County Airport, they've got a record you see for temperature precipitation back to 1998. So we can go ahead and select that. Certainly, if you're just looking at conditions since 1998, we can hit go. So now we've got our Lima station here. Maybe we want, from a management perspective, we want to look at last year. So we might select our daily information, and we could do a couple of different things. We can go between two dates, right? So you've got some options here that you can look at. Maybe I just want to look at last year's weather. So I click custom. Let's start easier. Maybe I just want to look at the last 7 days. And you can see the variables down here: precipitation, snowfall, snow depth, max, min, mean temperature. So that's just the daily average. Heating degree days, cooling degree days. Maybe I'm interested in the modified growing degree days, right? So, or growing degree days. Certainly we're advanced on those growing degree days. Let's go ahead and click that. And then you could say plot data. Well, now you're going to get a 7-day chart, right, of this particular location's high, low, growing degree days accumulation as well, right? So you can see few growing degree days here, certainly with temperatures into the 60s and 70s, right? So we've got, that might be something that you look at. Maybe you want to go last month. You want to look at January's temperature or plot in general. You can plot the data. So that gives all of January's high temperature, low temperature, and the amount of precipitation. And if you really want the data, and just the data alone, you can hit get tabular data. So you can click that. It'll put it in this form, or you can make it an Excel happy version here, CSV version, and actually download that data for free. Again, this is free data that's available. There are a lot of things to look at. Maybe you want to look at some seasonal stuff, and you look at freeze probabilities for Lima, right? Maybe you want the full period of record or the last 30 years. So let's collect the last 30 years. Actually, this one doesn't go back quite 30. Period of record, right? For our freeze probability. So we want to see when's the typical last freeze for this particular station, right? So here's a probability of a later freeze in spring indicated. And if you look at the different colors, 32 being, the freezing, or maybe we're interested in 28, the 50% probability, half the time that occurs after April 26th. So maybe this season with advanced phenology, things are breaking dormancy a little bit early. We might be a little bit concerned because that typical, even the earliest freeze, 90% of the time in Lima is after April 11th, right? So again, thinking about from a farm management perspective. There's a lot of information there. This is just a tease, just to offer you the opportunity to let you know that these tools are available. Feel free, to reach out if you have questions or you would like some more information about MRCC tools. So with that, I'm gonna share the last slide here with you for just a second. There's my contact information and also Bruce's information. This is, if Amanda, you can throw that Qualtrics into the chat. I'll be sending an email out to everyone with this Qualtrics link, easy for me to say. You can also catch last month's webinar at that YouTube link provided there. So we'll throw those in the chat, and we've got a couple more minutes for questions. So if there are any more questions, please feel free to put those in the chat or put those in the Q&A box. Again, I want to thank you, Bruce, for being here today, or if you have any last comments that you would like to make.
Yeah, you mentioned phenology, Aaron. Phenology is the study of biological events that occur based on the warming of maybe the season. Is that a fair way of describing phenology?
Yeah, basically how the crops advance right through the season based on those.
So that yellow blooming flower in the spring, that shrub, forsythia, right?
Yes.
I just looked up on the Ohio growing degree day calendar. We're 37 growing degree days away from the first bloom of the forsythia for Defiance, which is northern Ohio. We are 13 growing degree days away from the silver maple tree having its first bloom. Now, it's not a pretty bloom, you might say, but maple trees flower fairly early in the spring. So growing degree days already getting some traction.
Absolutely. We actually took a picture of a silver maple here in Columbus yesterday in full bloom. Our red maples are in their first bloom now, so that's unfortunate for our maple producers in the state. One of the management from a forestry is to, as we lose sugar maples in the southern range, is to switch to red maple. Really resilient. It's got a growing market, but with again challenged by some of the early season cutoff. So yeah, we really need to watch those freeze conditions this spring as things are breaking dormancy out there. Last few seconds, any last questions? If not, I want to thank everyone for joining us today. Certainly thank Bruce for a wonderful presentation and Amanda for helping with the webinar. The Qualtrics link is in the chat. I will send an email to follow up. Next month, March 16th, same time, 8 a.m. to 9 a.m. We will have Andy Michael on, entomologist and thinking about pest disease, and he'll have a grad student as well. Certainly weather and climate play a big role in pests as their ranges also shift into our region. So we'll get into that next month. So feel free, please join us next month for that webinar. All right, everyone, have a great day. Enjoy a little bit of rain today. Cooler conditions tomorrow, but we're really back out of the cold conditions by the weekend. I think spring is just around the corner. So thank you very much. We'll see you next month.